Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to the Catholic Mama, where you'll learn how to deepen and defend your faith, find comfort as we share the vocation of parenthood, and learn how to raise your children confidently Catholic. I'm your host, Christine Mooney-Flynn. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the Catholic Mama. I'm your host, Christine Mooney-Flynn. Thanks for joining me on this episode, where we are joined again by a good friend of mine, Jeannie Ewing, who is a Catholic author, writer, blogger, all the written word stuff. Thank you, Jeannie, for joining me.
Thanks for having me again, Christine.
I'm just giggling. I mean, we just spent the past 10 minutes just chit-chatting and catching up, because I think when was the last time? It was earlier this year.
It was like winter. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. When we were both stuck in, actually, you know what? A woman, a friend of mine texted me today, and she says, there's a YouTube channel that I follow. It's a weather guy. He's usually right on his predictions. And he said that this winter in the Midwest was going to be colder and more snow than average. And she said, welcome to the Midwest.
This coming winter or last winter?
This coming winter.
Oh, please. Oh, no. I didn't need to hear that. I could have gone the whole next couple months without knowing that.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, man.
So now we're both, before it was, I was on the East Coast, you're in the Midwest. Now we're both in the Midwest, right? Indiana is considered the Midwest.
It is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. One of those flyover states.
Yeah.
So we can hunker down and have another podcast in a few months even.
Yeah, maybe.
Be going outside.
Right.
As long as I was very happy when I saw, not very happy, but when the polar vortex happened before we moved here to Wisconsin, I thought, well, that's not going to happen again anytime soon, but maybe I was wrong. That was my big scientific observation. Well, it happened last year. It can't happen again. But Jeannie, I gave a very paltry introduction of you for somebody who didn't maybe listen to the other two podcasts that we've done together. Would you mind giving a brief introduction of yourself?
Oh, I think you did just fine.
Everything that has to do with Catholic and writing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good summary. I would just say if people want to know more information about me, they can go to my website, which is jeannieewing.com, and it has all my books, and it has all kinds of past speaking engagements and current ones and upcoming ones listed. I have my blog there. So there's a lot more info about what I do and who I am.
Send them out.
Yeah.
You did the work already. You wrote all of it.
Yeah, right.
Go look. And of course, dear listeners, I will put the links in that she just mentioned. And actually, we've never met in person, but hopefully we will next month.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I think Green Bay is, we went up to, Our Lady of Good Help, I think is the...
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So we were just there a couple weeks about a couple weeks or a month ago on a parish field trip. And I had never really been any further north than maybe 45 minutes north of where we are now in Wisconsin, even though I've been visiting the state for about 7 or 8 years. So we went up there, and it was a really interesting story. And I think we passed Green Bay, so it can't be that far.
You did. It's in the diocese. Yep.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Have you been to that shrine?
No, but I've heard many things about it this year. So I have a feeling that Our Lady of Good Help is saying, I want to help you.
Come up to the shrine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very cool. It's small, and that's unassuming, but for something Marian, it suits her.
Absolutely.
It was very nice to go, and it was great that my parish, the new parish that we just joined a couple months ago, does stuff like that. So it was a little caravan on the way up, and a little lunch and a talk. We heard a history and got to pray, and it was just nice.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not talking about Wisconsin or the winter.
That's okay.
I like that when I said, let's talk about your book, and you asked me which one, because the last time we talked, you're very prolific. I'd say you're the Stephen King of Catholic writers, but...
No, I wouldn't say that. My books are not like 400 pages long.
Yeah, so. And you don't do drugs to get them done, I'm assuming, too.
This
like
is true.
Yeah,
this
or
is
did.
Very true.
I think he wrote Cujo in a week, and he has no memory of doing it.
Yeah. He actually wrote his memoir about the craft of writing called On Writing.
Mm-hmm.
And he did mention that in there.
Yeah.
So
that book is exactly where I got that factoid. Can you imagine writing a whole book and having no memory of it?
That's kind of scary.
Yeah. Well, he's clean now, I think.
Yes.
So that's good. But you do write. I mean, you've had a lot of projects that have come out or are coming out this year.
No, well, I mean,
or it seemed like it
to date, I have, at that point there were a lot of releases. I have 7 books, and I'm actually working on my memoir right now. So it's a different direction. I don't have to worry about writing for what the publisher wants me to write, or it's very liberating. It's been really, I think, a deepening of my craft, and it's also brought out a lot of, besides the depth, it's brought out some honesty, I think, that I didn't feel like I had permission to write about in books pertaining to such a nuanced niche. Like, when you think about Catholic grief, it's so small of an audience and so small of a genre that it's kind of like you're really limited as to what you can say, and you have to always keep in mind to whom you're writing. And so this time, it's just been I guess just the way that I'm writing, it's just more free association. So, which will go under editing, of course. But it's just nice to know that my style and my voice can just come out as it will. I don't have to do everything censored as I'm writing it. So,
yeah. Well, now that you're saying you're writing your memoir, I've noticed you've been putting a lot of insights and memories up about past pregnancies. Is that part of the whole writing process?
You bet. You bet.
I've been enjoying those.
Well, thank you. I was part of this creative mastermind group, which just finished on Monday. So it was a 3-month commitment, and it's not a religious group at all. It was just a group of creative professionals, 20 of us, all over North America. And it was a collaborative effort, and it was just, there's a facilitator, of course, and he would post daily videos that would help encourage and challenge us based on whatever conversations we were having in this forum. And that was really where I felt like I had the permission and the freedom to go in this different direction. And so when I started doing that, I started just like, not my spiritual journal, not my prayer journal, but just like venting journal. So like every morning I just write whatever I want to write, whatever I'm thinking about, whatever upset me the night before, whatever I'm worried about, and I just get it out. And that's actually really, really cleared a pathway in my brain, actually, to articulate some of these other things that I'm working through and processing. That they pertain to like motherhood and going from infertility to superfertility, and what does that look like, and how come I don't see these conversations really happening in the Catholic community among women. It just doesn't seem like we talk about it. So I felt like, well, the conversation needs to happen. And my spiritual director said, I don't think that you're a writer for no reason going through this. So that's part of the reason that those microblogging posts have happened recently.
Well, it sounds like you're working, and especially I know you're pregnant with number 5 pretty quickly after giving birth to number 4, that there's a lot of emotions and processing that probably needs to happen there too. And as part of parenting, and it seems like you're working your way through that, it's nice to see that kind of honesty on a social media post, which is, you don't always see that.
That's true. No, that's true. It's definitely been well received, I would say. Actually, yesterday I got a couple comments from people I really admire who are other writers, and I was like, oh, wow, that's such a compliment. So it makes me, to me, it's kind of confirmation, or at least an affirmation that what I'm doing is resonating and to keep going. So that's helpful, because when you're a writer, you don't always know. Sometimes you're just like, am I getting anywhere? Is this vanity? What am I doing? So it's helpful to when you hear from people who are actually like, no, this is wonderful. This is really important or insightful, whatever words they use, whatever descriptor. Yeah. So after we had Joe in January, so he was born right before the polar vortex you were talking about. And I remember just being really scared when I went into labor, just because there's some trauma I've been trying to work through that pertained to our second child, Sarah, because she was A, born with a rare disease we didn't know about prenatally, and B, I had to go through a C-section after 26 hours of labor. So every child I've had since then, it's been compounded trauma, truthfully, of, oh my gosh, every time I go to the doctor's office, is something going to be wrong? And then when we lead up to labor and delivery, it's like just this panic. So I'd had him. I felt like the Blessed Mother was truly with me, because the whole time I was just praying to her. And my labor and delivery nurse was fantastic. She was basically like a doula. She was coaching me. She was, telling me, you're doing great. You're almost there. Keep going. You're actually talking. You're being nice when you're in, having these contractions. She was really, really awesome. And so when I had Joe, I just felt like, okay, I'm 38. Ben always wanted 4 kids. We finally have 4 kids. I really hope this is it. That's the truth. Because it was a very difficult pregnancy physically for me. And I had a lot of emotional stuff going on that just made, I don't know if it's because I was carrying a boy instead of 3 girls this time, but it was a very different experience emotionally, a lot more mood swings, I would say, for me. And so I was very happy with that. And we were, trying to adjust to this life. And over the summer, I have this nanny who comes. She's a high school student, and she used to babysit for us when we lived in a different city. And she comes and stays with us for like 2 months in the summer, and I pay her. And so she had been here, and I was finally able to kind of catch up on sleep and take some naps and go do some self-care things, right? Like meet friends for lunch or clean out the closets that I didn't get to. Believe it or not, that is a self-care thing for me, because I get stressed with clutter. And so I remember like late June, early July, I was like, oh, I can finally breathe again. And my husband and I went on a belated anniversary trip, and we had a wonderful time. We took 3-hour naps, things like that. I did some writing. And then like 3 weeks later, my period didn't come, and it didn't come, and it didn't come. And I truly was like, is something wrong? Am I in menopause? I could not, like, the last thing that I ever would have thought was, oh, you're pregnant again. Because I kept looking at my chart. Seriously, because I was looking at my chart, and I was, my husband even was poring over my chart. He's like, how can this be possible? I mean, obviously anything's possible when you're not abstaining, but it just didn't look like, based on the instructions from my Creighton practitioner, it didn't look like it could have been possible. And so I took, just like you were telling me earlier, I took a pregnancy test, and it was like, it didn't take any time at all. Pregnant. I took 2 of them 2 days in a row, because I couldn't believe it. And I cried. Yes. I cried and I cried. And I just was like, how, when I have a 6-month-old baby, I have a daughter with special needs who was just diagnosed with autism on top of everything else she has. My oldest daughter is having an anxiety problem. I'm like, why? Why did God think this was a good idea now? Because I wasn't even open. Like, I wasn't even remotely open to having another baby. Not even close. Like, I was telling everybody, I didn't say we were done, because you can't really say that when you use natural family planning. You know what I'm saying? When people say, oh, are you done? I'm like, well, I can't really say that, but I'm happy with what we have. That's kind of the answer I'd give. And so I was not happy with this. And I went through probably 2 solid weeks of sobbing and rage. And my poor husband was the recipient of a lot of it. Not that I was like raging at him, but that I was like venting in front of him.
There. Yeah.
Yeah. Just all these questions. And it threw me into a different place spiritually than I'd ever been before, even different than when we had Sarah. So.
Yeah. I mean, if you're not, you'd think, you have 4 and you have a 6-month-old baby. Even if you wanted more, there's still a dealing process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's funny to say. People have asked, oh, you're 4, you must be done. Actually, for the first time in 6 years, somebody asked me recently if this was my first kid. I was like, because I usually look way too tired and disheveled for anybody to think that I don't have any kids yet. So somebody asked me if it was my first. I was like, oh no, this is the fourth. But yeah, you really can't. People have asked, are you done after this? Well, I don't know.
Like it's their business.
Yeah, I know. Well, yeah, I know. Yeah, but I think about this. We've been on, the every other year plan. We've had a kid on every odd year since 2013, and I'm only 34. So, and my grandmother had kids until 42. I'm like, oh my God,
right?
I was like, I mentioned that to my husband, and we were both like, 4 is good. You don't need an extra or a different vehicle.
Right. Exactly. Right.
But who knows? It's just, you don't know, especially with natural family planning, which I do enjoy. I enjoy doing that more than anything in the past that I've done, because I did birth control, the pill and whatever else. And this feels right. But then you are, even if you're doing those things, you have to be open to life, even if the intention is not.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I think for me, so I don't have anything to compare it to because I've never been on contraception or anything like that. And one of the things I was telling my husband in the beginning after finding out about the baby was like, I just would get so angry or even really jealous when I'd see all these other families where the assumption, of course, in my mind was, well, they only chose to have 2 kids, or they stopped or they spaced their kids 5 years apart, stuff like that, right? Because our journey is so radically different. First, we were struggling to conceive. And then it just completely reversed. And I'm nearing 40. So, of course, the risk for miscarriage and the risk for genetic conditions. And we already have a child with a genetic condition. And it was everything that was swarming through my head. I'm just no, why would God allow? The only good thing I could conceive of this, pun intended, was that it was a human life.
Yeah.
But other than that, everything you're saying, I'm oh, great. Do we have to get another vehicle? What are we going to, what are we going to do about sleeping arrangements? And it was pretty much everything going through my head. And I could not think of one reason. Besides, it's a baby, it's a person, it's a soul uniquely created by God. I just couldn't. Yeah, I can't really say that I'm still there. Right. I can't really say that I'm still, that I've moved beyond that is what I'm trying to say. When I went to my last OB appointment, the midwife, she asked me, so what about connection? I'm like, huh? She's like, don't you have a connection with the baby? I'm like, no, I don't. And she looked kind of like she had heard that before, but it made her sad. That was kind of the look I saw in her eyes. And I said, I'm sorry. I'm just being honest with you. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I guarantee not very many people are honest to their doctors when it comes to something like that too.
Well,
that's
I can't though,
because if you're not, that you can see that in your writing and everything, but it's just not going to help anybody if you're not being honest about it.
Right.
And it'll work itself through. You'll work through it.
Yeah.
It doesn't just magically happen on its own.
Yeah.
You have to do it too. But yeah, I totally get it. As much as we wanted more kids, part of the reason my husband and I wanted more kids is we're only one of 2. And I don't have a really strong relationship with my one sibling, and it makes me really sad. So we're just going to pat him in. More kids. Somebody,
yes.
You're going to be friends. Somebody's going to be friends with somebody later on, unlike I am my brother. But it's a process. Even if you want a kid, it's still a process to, come to terms with it.
Right.
So,
right.
And hormones don't help either. It's not like you're
right. So I was 6 months postpartum, and then having that crash combined with the surge of hormones of being pregnant. That was a fun, because I just felt like I didn't know who I was even.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I couldn't predict when I would feel a certain way or why I was reacting to a certain thing, or even some of the way my perception about a person or about a situation. It's like, what the heck? This isn't the way I normally am. And, so I've kind of been nearing that quote midlife crisis age anyway. And I've been doing some deeper soul searching when it came to, just really everything from worldview to personal identity to familial identity. And so when, adding the pregnancy on top of that really exacerbated some of those things. And I couldn't really sift through or differentiate. Is this the truth about who I am and where God wants me to be? Or is this part of this whole hormonal soup, right? This mess. And it's hard to know. And so there is a particular, I think I mentioned this in the last podcast you and I did, there's a particular cross of infertility, but there's also a particular cross of super fertility is what they call it, right?
And oddly enough, you get to experience both of those, which is not typical.
Right.
So, a girl that I went to high school with just announced that she's pregnant with her fourth. And it was on Instagram, and in the caption, she's like, "Don't worry, we're going to this is our final because we're taking permanent measures to ensure that." And having been on the side of using contraception and using sex inappropriately, and then realizing the truth of everything, and then seeing posts like this, or my mom had mentioned something about women that she knew that had abortions, and one just was married with kids and decided that she was done having any more kids.
Yes.
And I just, every time I think about that, I feel like somebody punched me in the gut. That particular instance that you're already in I don't know. It's set up for family.
I didn't realize until this pregnancy, I had a conversation with a friend of mine who also has a daughter with Apert syndrome. And I'm not 100% sure if she volunteered at a pro-life life center kind of place, or I'm not sure exactly, but she said that actually most of the abortions or women seeking abortions she would meet were actually married women, happily married in stable relationships. They already had kids and they were just so overwhelmed and couldn't imagine. And actually I understood that. I understood it because not only do we have the quantity of children that's beyond what most Western people have, in Western society. So we have pretty much double the amount of kids that most people have, but we also have Sarah's diagnosis with 15 specialists, and she's got, 6 or 7 other things besides her primary diagnosis of Apert. And I just was truly, I felt that we had legitimate reasons to permanently abstain. And I mean, not abstain, avoid. That was the whole other issue though. That was actually kind of probably a lapsus linguae, but when I actually joined this super fertility community online, these women were saying things like, oh, well, having a child every year and using all the natural family planning systems that are out there that are approved by the church, and none of them work for us. We just basically accepted the fact that we're going to have to permanently abstain. And I'm like, I don't think that's God's plan for marriage. And they would say, well, Mary and Joseph did it. And I'm like, but they were a huge exception. And then they would argue, a lot of them got defensive, and they were defending why this was a good thing. And I'm like, I understand the church says periodic abstinence, and my husband and I have always been on board with that, but it just seems very extreme to me that these women were just talking about their marriages as if living as brother and sister were normal, acceptable. It was some kind of higher calling even. Some of them even said, well, maybe it's our path to sainthood. And then many of these same women they would mention something like postpartum psychosis, or that they had been suicidal, because they would have a child every year for 6 years in a row. Okay. So talk about the hormonal fluctuations, and then you talk about the adjustment, and you're not sleeping. So you have that chronic sleep deprivation. And I have a background in counseling. I'm like, that's a really serious problem. How come we're glossing over this? Why is this not a conversation we're having about the importance of mental health and how it incorporates into the total picture or the total dynamic of one's marriage and family?
Yeah, that is a problem, because you don't hear about this, but which is why, again, what you said, your spiritual director saying you're not just a writer going through this for no reason, so you can help. when you said yes, you can understand the despair and how am I going to do this? And it's interesting that you would have women, my initial thought when you said that was like, well, I wonder how many of these women have a very strong faith or understanding in church teaching to begin with, or even maybe a misunderstanding of, I can't think of what the heresy is. It's where the spiritual is higher than the physical rather than a combination of the two. Atheism, is that it?
Something like that.
Yeah. It's hard to think straight when you have hormones going through you anyway, and you're tired.
Yes.
But it's just, it's coming from, I used to be very pro-choice and pro-abortion. And then seeing people, willingly just admit that they're going to cut off life surgically.
Yeah. Right. Right.
It's so, I'm surprised at how much freedom I have found in the Catholic Church's sexual teachings as I have. And when I hear about people still having abortions or, getting tubes tied or vasectomies, that reminds me of a heavy yoke that I used to have on me, that thinking that.
Yes, it is.
It's very hard for me to understand now looking back. Just personally, I know I could never go back to that way of thinking because I did that and it's a heavier yoke than what.
So the yoke you're talking about, of course, is because of sin, mortal sin.
Right.
But there is a different kind of yoke, a different kind of burden when you are living what the church teaches and something, your family takes a shape that you didn't imagine or that you don't really believe you can handle.
Sure.
And even though I've always considered myself to be a faithful Catholic, I'm a cradle Catholic, and I've gone through seasons of dry spells or, not being as faithful to God as I could be or should be. But even with all of that, I have to believe there's a reason God permitted me to have that temptation, to understand with more empathy why women would feel so desperate and be in such despair so as to choose a permanent measure of preventing pregnancy through sterilization or getting rid of a pregnancy through abortion, getting rid of a human life. And of course, when those kinds of things would emotionally come to mind, that I just thought there's no way I could ever be responsible for taking a human life, especially an innocent human life. Anybody though, I can't even kill a bug. It's because there's been so much of life and death that has been forced upon us through Sarah's condition, so much suffering, so much uncertainty. And there are so many, people in the APERT community. It's a small community. And we know every year of 2-3 deaths of children who have APERT, and usually from unknown reasons or undiagnosed conditions, silent conditions. And so because that's so much part of our life and just the lens through which we see things, right? The way we choose to live, it forms and informs everything about us as a family. There's no way I could do that. Even despite the way I felt, despite the fact that I truly believe that we had legitimate reasons not to have any more children. And I just kept thinking, boy, this baby is really blessed to be in the womb of someone who would not choose that. Because I could understand why someone else in my situation, even if they had a Christian faith or even a Catholic faith, I could understand why they would get so desperate. I do, because it's a dark place to be. And yet, again, like what you were saying, I would take a step back from time to time and think, okay, I can't make any big decisions about anything in our life when I'm hormonal. Like that doesn't make sense. The rational brain is not operating right now. So I would allow my husband to kind of put me back, to reality or bring me back to the ground, to earth, and be the voice of reason, right? When I was kind of spewing my ugliness, these ugly feelings and thoughts. But at the same time, my spiritual director was saying, maybe part of this is that it's necessary for me to go through these kinds of really dark emotions because I'm supposed to learn something from that and then share it with the world through my writing. It's a different a different kind of darkness than what I wrote about in From Grief to Grace. It's a deeper level. It's more painful. It feels more purgative. And it feels like God is basically annihilating me from the inside out. Like he's completely destroying me from the inside out. So even my relationship with him has drastically changed. And it's just affected every facet of our life because of learning about this baby. So it's weird to talk about, and it's hard for me to kind of summarize, but I really feel like for many of us, we will go through periods of our life. We don't expect that. We don't anticipate it, but where we fall upon something that happens that we hate the kind of feelings and questions and thoughts that we have. We hate them because we're maybe trained or conditioned that they were wrong and they were bad or maybe sinful. And at the same time, if we allow ourselves to move through those, if we continue to bringing them back to the Lord, if we continue to have healthy conversations with people like a spiritual director, like a spouse or a pastor, God moves and works through those things to bring us to a place where our faith is new in some way. So my spiritual director basically said, imagine you're like a snake who's shedding its skin and it thinks it's dying because the skin is coming off of it. Look, it can see it, but really it's just outgrowing it. And she said, that's what's happening to you. You're outgrowing your faith. It's to get bigger. So
that basically sums up why everybody should try to get a spiritual director too.
Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful. I mean, to hear that kind of perspective when you're going through something like this or anything heavier, where it would be understandable and maybe not easy, but just understandable why you would lose faith or maybe step away from a relationship with God. But as a person who's so blessed with writing abilities and you're committed to your faith, I mean, I can only see good things coming from this eventually.
I hope.
It's painful to go through it now.
Yeah, I hope.
I was just thinking it was 10 years ago last month that my brother's best friend died in a car accident on his wedding day.
Oh my heavens.
And my brother was there with him when it all happened. And prior to that, I was living, it's that moment when I found out about the accident. I noticed at that point I'd been living a very muted life. Everything, like my emotions were very muted. And that event seemed to make everything in full color. And I felt a lot of things that I was suppressing, or I don't know, it triggered something. And it made me realize that I'd been living in like sepia tones for a number of years. And even though there was a long time between that happening and when I even considered Christianity or Catholicism, and I went from, at that point I was spiritual still, woo-woo spiritual stuff. And I would still have to go through the phase of atheism and the despair that came along with that. I can look back and see that really traumatic event, which triggered a lot of emotions and a darkness, a lot of, kind of a darkness tinge to everything. It really, I can see that was the initiation of my faith now.
Yes.
But it took,
sometimes,
I can look at it 10, now it's 10 years in the future.
Yeah, but I think oftentimes, maybe even always, I can't say that for sure, but that God uses some type of devastation to wake us up, to jar us out of that complacency or the lukewarm kind of existence. And sometimes it doesn't make sense to us, except in light of our Christian faith, right? It doesn't make sense why it would have to be something unspeakable or something unfathomable or something horrendous and atrocious and violent even. Why would it be something like that would be the very means that God would use to bring us to a spiritual awakening and a depth of our faith or renewal of it in some way?
It reminds me of a Fulton Sheen quote. Sometimes the only way the Lord can get into some hearts is to break them.
Yes.
So
that's beautiful.
Well, Fulton Sheen, everything. He's just pick a quote out of the hat. Well, we didn't talk about parenting with the Beatitudes, but have you gone back or thought about the Beatitudes and all of this that you're going through, or has it just been a different kind of spiritual journey that you've been on?
I haven't overtly thought of the Beatitudes. It's been, like I said, it's like a shattering.
Yeah.
It's like God's doing open heart surgery on me. So in some ways, I feel like I've had to go back to the beginning, the infancy of my faith. But certainly I think that those tenets, the principles and that basis, that foundation is always there. It's still there. So yes and no, if that's a fair answer.
Sure. Even as you're saying, like the infancy of your faith, I mean, you never, nobody ever outgrows the basics or the fundamentals. We can just move more deeply into them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If that means starting at square one, then it's not starting at square one as a newbie, but starting or going back to square one and going deeper into it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, Jeannie. Your honesty is lovely.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah. And as I mentioned before, this is the first podcast I've had where both people on it are pregnant.
Mm-hmm. And this is how it ended up. So hopefully good.
I will put your website in the show notes. And I'll also link the other 2 episodes that we've done together because those are wonderful. And you said that somebody invited you to speak at a retreat. Did they know about you before they heard you on here, or is that something separate?
They knew about me through their pastor, whom I'm friends with.
Oh, so
they weren't acquainted with my style of speaking or writing or anything yet.
I know. Well, once you hear yourself, you're a very good speaker. So once you hear that, you're in. Well, I'm glad you got.
It's a gift.
There's lots of gifts. Super fertility.
Yeah, right. Speaking. I have to remember that. Yes, right. Yes.
My husband's always big on saying, God can draw straight with crooked lines.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is a good thing because many of us would be pretty sorry, in a pretty sorry state if that wasn't the case.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah.
All right, Christine. Well, maybe we'll talk again.
Yeah, absolutely. Always the open invitation to be on. And for everybody listening, thank you for joining us. And I'll put all the links that you need to find Jeannie in other places besides this podcast on. And don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss episodes. They do come out once a week, unless I am super hormonal from morning sickness or in labor. I'm not sure which. Or both. Who knows? All right. Until next time, thank you. Don't forget to head over to thecatholicmama.com to get your free copy of How to Talk to Your Kids About God. This handy little ebook will teach you how to broach the topic of God with your children or how to respond to your kids when they want to talk about God, as well as give you answers to 7 of the trickiest questions about the faith that Christian parents face. You'll love the easy to understand grown-up answers, the pared down but not talked down answers you can share with your kids, plus recommended resources if you'd like to deepen your understanding of the topic. Get yours free at thecatholicmama.com.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.